All right, I just want to read the question quickly. I have to read it off of my phone here. Sorry, let me just get to it. So far we've worked with the simple interest and compound interest formula, and we found A every time, all right, the final amount. So they'll say how much money is in the account after 10 years, or how much money do they need to pay back after 10 years, and so on. But these questions have to do with finding the other values. All right, sorry, I actually don't know where this picture is now, so let me go on to classroom. Oh, sure. Okay, so for question 1, they're saying a sum of money was invested for a period of 8 years. Okay, so that is why my N value is 8, because it was 8 years. If the simple interest rate, that's why I've used the simple interest formula, if the rate was 6.4% per annum, so there my interest rate is 6.4 over 100, and the investment grew to a value of 11,340 Rand. All right, so they're saying the investment grew to a value of 11,340. So that is now the A value, all right, the final value after 8 years. Determine how much money was invested. Now we all need to know that the amount of money that was invested, the original amount invested or borrowed, is P. So that's what they were asking us to find in this question. All right, so what you do is they said it was simple interest, so you write your simple interest formula down. Then you fill in all of the values that they did give us. All right, so the final amount after 8 years, there we go. That's our A value. Interest rate 6.4%. Number of years was 8. Now, when you're solving for P, that is the easy one to do, right? It's just outside the bracket. So what we're actually doing with the P and this bracket is we're multiplying P by the bracket. And what's the opposite of multiplying by a bracket? Just dividing by that same bracket. Okay, so that is why when you want to get P on its own, you're going to divide the 11,340 by this entire bracket. Okay, you don't have to work it out first. You can just take that value and divide it straight by that bracket, which is what I wrote there. Okay, you can also write it like this. You can also say 11,340 divided by the whole bracket, but then obviously you have to leave that bracket in brackets. Okay, you can do it like that as well. If you don't like writing it in a fraction, that's perfectly fine. Then you type this into your calculator, putting the brackets where they should be, and your answer is then 7,500 Rand. Okay, number 2. The sum of money was invested for a period of 5 years. All right, so N is 5. If the compound interest rate, so it's compound interest they're telling us, so that's why I wrote down the compound interest formula. That's always your first step, write down either the simple interest or the compound interest. Saying if the compound interest rate was 5%, so I is 5%, and the investment grew to a value of 7,785, right? So again, the investment grew to this amount. So this value, the value that it's growing to, is 7,785,32. Right? So if the investment grew to that value, determine how much money was invested. So again, they're asking us to find P, determine how much money was invested. Exactly the same as in the previous question. The only difference is that now we're using the compound interest formula. So again, you write your formula down, then you fill in the values that they gave you. Your A value, your I value, the interest rate, and the number of years. Again, it's just P multiplied by this bracket. What is the opposite of multiplying by something? Dividing by that same thing. All right, so you're going to take the 7,000 that you have on the side and divide it by that whole bracket. Okay, and when you type that into the calculator, you get 6,100 Rand. Okay, number 3. An investment of 10,500 Rand. So now they're telling us the investment was 10,500 Rand. Grew to an accumulated amount of, so they're giving us the final amount as well, 15,918 Rand over a period of 12 years. Saying that N is 12. And calculate the simple interest rate. Okay, so simple interest rate, so we write down the simple interest formula, and we need to find I. Now, when you're finding I, because it's in the bracket, you actually need to move things systematically. All right, it has many more steps than when you're just finding P, because P is outside the bracket. When you have to actually solve something that's inside the bracket, you have to do a lot of work. So first, you are going to fill all your values in. All right, and guys, for this line, you get 2 marks. All right, so even if you can't then, if you don't know how to then get I on its own, you can get 2 marks just by knowing what P is, what A is, what N is, and filling it into the correct formula. Okay, so that's 2 marks straight away. So A is the bigger number there, P is 10,500, and N is 12, number of years. Now you're going to systematically move things away from the I. All right, the first thing that you're going to move is always the number in front of the bracket. I'm multiplying by this number, so I'm going to divide by that number. Right? Next up, that's what we're left with. And I also just wrote this I times 12 as just 12I. All right? It's just a number times a letter. It's better to write the number in front, but it doesn't really matter. Now, if we're looking at that, the next thing that we must move is this plus 1. It becomes a minus 1. And we're left with 12I here. Then we're going to take whatever this is and we divide by 12. Right? Because here I'm multiplying by 12. When I move it, I must divide by 12. You type that whole thing into the calculator with the brackets in the correct spot and divide by 12, and you get 0,049 with a bunch of other decimals. Okay, you don't round that off. I'll show you. If you round it off, you're going to lose marks. So you literally will type this in 15,918 over 10,000 minus 1, close bracket, divide by 12 equals. Gives you a fraction, but if you press SD, it will show you what that fraction is in decimal form. All right, now guys, I'm saying you mustn't round this off and then the rounded off answer times by 100. No, in your calculator, you're going to leave this there and just press times 100. The calculator takes your whole answer. That's what A and S means. All right, the full answer, and multiplies it by 100. And there you get your interest rate. This is what you're going to round off. Okay, you're not going to round this off. Whatever you have in your calculator there, you're going to times by 100, and that is what you round off. Okay, you're only allowed to round off your final answer, not in between. If you round off in between, you're going to lose marks for doing that. Okay, so 4,93%. Number 4, an investment of 4,000 Rand. So there's our P value. The investment is 4,000 Rand. Grew to an accumulated amount of 6,173.20. So that's the A value. Over a period of 6 years. So there's your N value. So guys, you need to be able to read through a question like that and say immediately, this is A, this is P, this is N. All right. Calculate the compound interest rate. So they want us to find I, but they're saying compound interest, meaning we need to use the compound interest formula, the one with the N in the exponent. All right, you write your formula down, you fill all your values in the correct spots. Now, this was a difficult one. We didn't actually do an example like this with the other group. All right. Again, the first thing that you need to move, because now I again is in the bracket. Okay, meaning I must systematically move everything away from first the bracket and then from I. All right, so it's a bit more difficult, The first thing that you're always going to move is this 4,000. Because you're multiplying by 4,000 here, you're going to divide by 4,000. Now you're left with a bracket to the power of 6. Now, guys, what is the opposite of raising something to the power of 6? Let me ask it differently. What's the opposite of squaring something? The opposite of squaring something would be, what cancels out a square? Hannah, do you want to try? Don't know. What cancels out a square? What's the opposite of square? Square rooting. Right? Are we fine with that? The opposite of squaring something is square rooting it. So the opposite of raising something to the power of 6 is taking the 6th root of that thing. Please write this down. I'm pretty sure the majority of you guys didn't even do this work. But anyway, what can I do about that? Please write this down. So you take the 6th root of that whole number, which is that fraction, and you're left with 1 plus I, and all that's then left to do here to get I on its own is you have to minus that 1. I'll show you now how to type it into the calculator. And then again, because you're finding the interest rate, you're going to get a decimal that you must straight away in your calculator multiply by 100. I'll show you quickly how to type it in. If you have this calculator, it doesn't have to be the silver one. It can be the pink, blue, or the normal, like black one, I suppose. If you look at this button that has an X with a little block above it, on top of that button, they have this button. It looks like this. So it's a root, and then it also has like a little black box there as well. Okay, so this is the button that you have to use when you need to put in a special root. All right, so like a 6th root like we have in this case. So to get to that button, you need to press Shift and then that one there. The number on the outside is a 6. And then you use the arrow to go to the inside of it. And then you're going to type this fraction. So 6173.20 over 4,000. Right, now if you press the arrow once, it takes you out of the fraction, but you're still in the root. So this minus 1 is not supposed to be in the root, so I need to press the arrow again. Now I'm actually outside of the root. Okay, if I only press that arrow once and I do my minus 1, do we see that it's in the root still? And we don't want that. Okay, if you make that mistake, you can just press the delete button. It will take it away. So you press the arrow button a second time to get out of the root. Then you type minus 1. Then you press equals. There is your I value, but this is now the one that you are not going to round off. So you can see I wrote it as it was there with a dot, dot, dot. You press times 100, and that is your interest rate. Okay, so now if we have to round this off, 0.49998, do we agree that it has to go to 0.50? All right. So that is the interest rate for that one, for number 4. So this is the most difficult type of question where you have compound interest and you have to find I. So whatever that exponent is to get rid of it, or when you move it, you turn it into that root. So if it was a 10, you would do the 10th root, right? Does that make sense? If it was a 20, you would do the 20th root. So you would use this root button, and whatever the exponent was will go in that number. Okay, so the opposite of raising something to a power is taking that root. All right, number 5, the last one, was finding N. So they said 5,800 Rand was invested. So if that is the amount that was invested, that is our P value in a savings account and grew to 12,000. So if it grew to an amount, that is the A value. So 12,064, that's A. After a period of N years, so they're not telling us how many years now for this one. If the interest rate offered was 10.8% per annum, so we're going to write that as 10.8 over 100, and they're saying simple interest, determine the value of N. So simple interest, so we use the simple interest formula. And then we start filling everything in. Guys, we're not going to give you these formulas in the test. You need to know them off by heart. Okay, if you don't know these formulas, you're going to get 0 for the whole finance section. So please, you put your A value in and then equals P, which is 5,800. Bracket 1 plus I is 10.8%. So we write that over 100 times N. N is what we're finding. Now again, N is inside the bracket, so we need to move everything away first from the bracket and then from the N. So we're going to have multiple steps. The first thing is always the number in front of the bracket that you move first. All right, because we're timesing by this, we're going to divide by it. Then we're left with just the bracket. The number in front is now gone. Next thing we need to move is this. Plus 1 becomes a minus 1. We're just left with I times N. Now to get N on its own, I'm multiplying by 10.8 over 100. The opposite of multiplying by this fraction is dividing by this fraction. You don't change the fraction. You don't change the thing you're dividing by. All right, you just change the operation. So on this side, I'm timesing by it. So now I must divide by that exact same fraction on the other side. Then you type that into the calculator and it will give you your answer. I'll show you again quickly how to type that in. But you're basically just going to use your brackets and your fraction button. So I'm going to do bracket 12,064 over 5,800. Arrow to move out of the fraction, minus 1. Close bracket. Divided by 10.8 over, I typed 108 there. 10.8 over 100 equals, there you get your answer, 10 years. So only when you're finding I do you have to times by 100. Okay, for the others, your answer will just be there once you've typed it all in. Okay, now you are going to work on mixed worksheet 2. Which is on the grade Google Classroom, but I will put it on the board now. We're going to do the whole worksheet. Okay, I think it's numbers 1 to 7. Now in the document, the page is just printed twice. Okay, so at the end of page 1, when you go to the next page, it's the same page again. Okay, so don't think that you're doing 2 separate worksheets. Just going to the end of the first page. I think it's numbers 1 to 7. And then after this, we're done with finance. All right, we're starting similarity tomorrow. First, we're going to mark this homework. Then we're going to start similarity. So guys, you are going to have to please watch that video tomorrow for the answers to this. All right. I know it's not nice to have to work at home, but if you don't, you're going to fall behind. You are supposed to be doing a test on this stuff and probability, which we did ages ago. Let me just check. On the 30th of August, which I think is next week Friday, isn't it? Let me check. This Friday. No, next week. Oh, flip. Next week Monday. Next week Monday. Yeah, so we'll still communicate with you about that because we don't know if everyone will be back at school next week. But that's what we're working towards, right? So you need to know all this finance stuff for next week, Monday, as well as probability. Now, guys, the finance is nice because you can get marks easily for finance questions. Because like I said, when you're just writing everything in its place, that's 2 marks. Then just for typing stuff into the calculator, writing the answer down, that's another mark. Okay? But you have to know the formulas. You have to know what each of the letters represent. You can't just be like, oh, I'm just going to write a test on finance and I don't know any of the formulas or any of that stuff. All right, you have to please practice it. The finance is the easy part. Okay, the probability is another story. I did some probability with the group on Friday because the week before test week, I only saw them once, so I never taught them two-way tables, all right, which I did with you guys. So I did that with them on Friday, and we did a quick revision on tree diagrams. So if you want to look at that again for preparation for the test, it is there, right? And yeah, I'll probably do some probability, more difficult questions with you guys on Friday, just as like a last test revision. Okay, but this is the last that we're doing on finance. Okay, we can't spend more time on it. All right, I'm just going to put that on the board and then you can start. You can also work from your phones, that's fine.